We're so worried about losing time that you're obsessing over the time that you've lost. So you're losing more time with that as well.
Time is something that I think about constantly, and even more so since my son was born. But I had a pretty transformative moment in my life. In May of 2021, I was out for a drink with a friend that I hadn't seen in a while. And I was basically telling him how I was feeling anxious, a bit upset about the fact that I lived far away from my parents. My family lived in Boston. I was living in California at the time, and that I only saw my parents once a year. And he said to me, "Well, how old is your dad?" I said, "He's 65." And he looked at me and he said, "Okay, so you'll see him 15 more times before he dies." And I felt like I got punched in the gut. He wasn't saying it to be rude or to be mean. It was just math. If I saw him once a year, the average life expectancy is 80 and he was 65, I was going to see him 15 more times before he died. The next morning, I told my wife that I wanted to move to the East Coast. Within 30 days, we had sold our house in California, bought a house on the East Coast, and moved our whole life. I quit my job. We moved everything. It was all about time. It was just the first time in my life that I had realized that time was never going to be forgiving, because time doesn't care what you do on a daily basis. It's just going to keep moving. And whether you spend it with people you care about, whether you're building the relationships that will matter in the end, or whether you're doing nothing, it's going to continue rolling. So starting to be more aware of the precious nature of time and of prioritizing the things that will really matter in the end, not the hustle of whatever it is that you think you're supposed to be doing, but of prioritizing things that are important to you, that are uniquely important to you, and embracing them and enjoying them and pausing to appreciate when something is beautiful. That's how we all start to take advantage and start to have a better, healthier relationship with time.
I feel what's also something we got to think about it. And as I was hearing you talk, is that a lot of the choices we make are about how much more we can shove into our time. Like, I got to like optimize my time for things, and being proactive means that, okay, I've these many hours in a day, so I'm going to try and sleep lesser, so I can make sure I balance everything out. But you are going to give up on something to put that in there. But then the question comes in is that, but does that mean that you achieve less in life? Does that mean that you're telling yourself, okay, I'm not going to be successful by the world's parameters of success? And that's a scary thing for someone to kind of grapple with. So how did you grapple with it?
You have to know what you want. Part of all of this is figuring out what you want and what are the high leverage ways to go after it. If you never stop to think about what are the highest leverage activities I can do, you're going to be wasting so much energy and movement and time with very little output. You're going to spend all of your time on a one-to-one basis where there's 1 unit of input to get 1 unit of output. Early in your career, you can't really avoid that. Most of your time is going to be a one-to-one trade. But once you're about 30 and beyond, once you've explored and you've started to be able to see the different opportunities that exist out there, you need to prioritize and find those ones where it is a 1 unit of input for a 10 units of output, where you can put in that same hour of time but generate an enormous output. And that's what I have found now for myself, is those opportunities where I might have days where I only have to work 2 hours. And it doesn't matter because I know what the output is, and I know that my work is still working for me. You think about leverage. Naval has talked about this a lot. Content that you're putting out into the world has the ultimate leverage. Just 2 days ago, I had a perfect example of this. I had tweeted something in November of 2021, so 16 months ago. Bill Ackman, the famous billionaire investor, somehow had a friend send it to him. I don't know Bill. I've never met him in my life. A friend sent it to him and he reposted it and said, "This is fantastic." I replied to that tweet and just said, "Thanks for sharing it. We should get lunch in New York sometime. Lunch on me," which is kind of funny. He's a billionaire. And he replied immediately and took me up on it. And so now I'm getting lunch with this famous billionaire investor. And that to me was this unbelievable example of something that I created 16 months ago is still doing work for me. It's working on my behalf when I haven't even thought about it in in a year and a half, and it's out there working for me. So that's leverage when you start putting things out into the world that are still working for you. And when you do it once, great. Now you do it 100 times. You have an army of things out there working for you in the world. And that's when you separate inputs from outputs. That's when your time starts to become you are the boss of your time rather than time being your boss.
It also allows you to kind of look at the problem is we so you I feel the industrial age at some point made the world look at things in a very input and output scenario. Right? You go into work, you clock in at 9, you clock out at 5, and you get paid this amount of money. Um, and at some point, that feels like that one single track that you have to follow. But what we're realizing, especially with the online space, they can kind of go wider. And if you kind of play it right, I don't think going back to balance, you never find that exact balance. But I think at some point you understand the mix that works for you. And the mix is different for everybody in terms of what you want across, um, what you term as wealth, like just taking from what you were saying. But does that also lead you to thinking too much about all the options you have? Because let's admit, take a step back and say the number of opportunities we have today as human beings feels like infinite. And so you might spend so much time in just like analysis, paralysis, or overthinking that you're never going to come back onto taking that call.
As you expand in your career, the opportunity playing field endlessly expands. Early in your life, early in your career, there's like a couple of opportunities you see in front of you, maybe one, and you have to take it. And as you continue to do better, as you build skills and build knowledge, the opportunity playing field just continues to expand, but your time doesn't expand. So you have to get better and better about figuring out which opportunities are the ones you're going to focus on. And it's terrifying. I have a terrible time saying no to money because my mentality is like, if someone's willing to pay me for something, I got to take it.
Exactly.
And not think about, okay, what is the trade-off? When my son was born, this was the first time in my life that I had a very, very clear perspective on what I was trading if I took that opportunity on. Now, anytime someone sends me a new opportunity, I think about him and I say, okay, I can either spend this extra 5 hours a week on this opportunity, or I can spend it hanging out with my son, who is at a phase of his life where every day he's learning something new, changing, talking, smiling at me. So what do I want to do? Is it worth 5 hours of time with my son? And that has now given me this amazing way to think about it. It used to be, it's just 5 hours. I don't know. What am I trading off for it? I'm just going to do the extra 5 hours. Now I have a thing that I need to think about. And you start to find those in life. What are those things? And it might be that it changes, right? Like he's young now. There's an interesting phase of his life. He's not in school, so he's at home. I can spend time with him. But once he's in school, maybe then I want to take on that opportunity. But right now, it doesn't make sense.
Did that make you rethink things? If it did, make sure you check out the full episode.